Hi guys, welcome to Tactic Apps. In today's video, I'll be showing you guys how to create a custom WPF control that looks and behaves like the YouTube subscribe button. Now, I already have a project here, and within my project, I have a few resources. So one resource here is the Roboto regular font. It's a font file, and I have a text file here. And within this file, I have a few colors defined here that I'm going to be using in this project, as well as some geometry data that I'll be using for the icons in the project. So I'll go ahead and add in a custom control, add new item. So under the WPF here, so we have a custom control, and this just inherits from the control class that's provided by the WPF framework. So I'll go ahead and give it a name, sub button. Okay, so Visual Studio has added in the necessary files. So this is a class file here, which is our sub button class, and we have a resource dictionary. So within our resource dictionary is a style that defines the control template, and the control template simply defines the visual appearance of our control. So it actually targets this class here and defines the visual appearance. Now I'll go back to my class here. Okay, now you can see the subclass inherits from the control class. So I'll get rid of this access modifier. I'll change it to a public one. And now what we need to do here is to mimic the behavior of a YouTube subscribe button. Now the YouTube subscribe button has got two states, the subscribed state and the unsubscribed state. So we need to keep track of that. So the way we can do that is by adding in a Boolean property. So I'll go ahead and add in a dependency property of the type Boolean. I'll give it a name, subscribed. So I'll set its owner class here, and the property metadata, that's the default data. I'll set that to false. Let me just put it in a single line here and get rid of this comment. Okay, we have our subscribe property there. And the other thing is we also need to keep track of the notification property, whether notifications are turned off or on. So I'll need to add another property of the Boolean type as well. I'll give it a name, notify flag. I'll set the owner class as well. The metadata will be set to false, and let me put it in a single line. Okay, so the minimum properties that we need are set. Let me go to the resource dictionary. So here we have a control template. Now what happens is when you create an instance of a control, so during the process of instantiation, what happens is it looks for a control template that's defined. So, and it gets whatever is in that control template and renders it as the actual control. So this is where we define the appearance of our control. So I'll get rid of this border. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the grid, and within the grid element I'm going to divide it into two columns, and I'll place my elements within those columns. If you've noticed, the YouTube subscribe button has got a bell icon on the right side and the actual button on the left. So I'll be trying to place those two in the grid columns. Alright, so I'll go ahead and add in a grid, and I'll define some grid columns. Okay, so I'll set the width of the column to auto, and I can do that by just setting it to the star icon there. So that means the column will resize according to the content. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in a border. And within this border, I'm going to add in a label that will contain the text. So I'll give the border a name. I'll give it a name back because it's our background. I'll set its background color to the YouTube red. Now I have that already defined here. So just copy that. And I actually copied these values from the YouTube website itself. I'll set the corner radius to 2 pixels. And I'll place this border inside the first column. So using the attached property, grid.column, I'll set that in the first one. Now we know 0 represents the first one, and 1, and so on and so forth. So it starts counting from 0. So that would be the first column. Now our label here, I'll give it a name. I'll give it a name text. I'll set its font size to 12 and the font family. So I need to access this file here, which is our font file. So I can reference it here by just adding in a full stop and a slash and a hash, and I'll give in the name of the font. Okay, so that's our font. I'll set the horizontal and the vertical content alignment. I'll set that to center. I'm also going to set the padding to 0. And the content of this label will be a text, which will be subscribe. Okay. Now I'm also going to add in a path, which will be our bell icon. Oops. And this path will have a fill of dark gray, which I have defined here already. So I get this dark gray. So I'll set its alignment to center, both horizontal and vertical. Okay, now I need to define the geometry of this path, and that has to be set through the data property here. So I'll go to my resources here, and I'll choose the outline bell. I'll copy the geometry data and paste it in. Okay, now I'll give this path a name. I give it the name bell. Okay, and I'm going to place it in the second column of the grid. So using the attached property grid column, I'll place it in the second one, which is at the index of 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build the solution and then have a look at how the control appears here. So I'll go ahead and build the solution. Okay, so it was built successfully. I'll go ahead and add in the control so we can see it here under the local namespace. So I'll add in the control and I'll set its alignment to center so that it doesn't stretch. I'll do the same for the vertical alignment as well. So we have what looks like the subscribe button. So I'm going to define the padding around here so that at least it can look a bit in the center and have some space around there. So I'll go back. So within the label, I'm going to set the foreground color. I'll set that to white. And maybe let's try to use the default padding and see how it looks. Okay, so apparently it looks like that. Now you can see the bell icon is a bit at the bottom. I want to lift that up a bit and move it to the right. So I'll set the margin. So 5 pixels on the left, 0 on the top, and 0 on the right, and maybe 3 at the bottom. Okay, so at least it looks a bit centered. Now I'll go back and play around with the padding and make sure it's centered. So we have the alignment set to center. So let me see if I set the padding to 0, then add some padding the border. Let me try 8 and 5. Okay, not bad. So I think I'll leave it there. Okay, so apparently we have the visual appearance of our control, but now I need to define the behavior of the control so that we can change states from subscribed to unsubscribed and vice versa. So I'll go back within my control template. I'm going to add in a trigger. So within the triggers, I'm going to add in a trigger, and this trigger will target the property type, will listen for any changes to the subscribed property that we defined here in our class, or subscribed property here that we defined. So this trigger is going to listen for any changes on that. So if the value is set to true, then it's going to execute whatever we're going to put here, or it's going to set whatever we're going to put here. So I'll add in a setter, and our setter will target the background property of the element that we have here, our border element, and we've given it a name back here. So I'm going to set that as our target, and we are going to set the value of the background to a light gray, which I've already defined here in the resource file. Okay, so that's the light gray. All right, and we are also going to add in another setter that would target the content of our label. The target name that we have here is text, so we are targeting that element. And we are setting its value to subscribed. Or add in another setter. This one will target the foreground. Of our text element. And its value will be set to dark gray, which we have here. Okay, so I can go back to the main window. I'll build the solution and then let's just see the behavior. Okay. All right, the solution was built. So I have my control here defined in the main window. So I'll go ahead and change the subscribed value and see if there'll be any changes to the appearance of our control. So I'll change that to true. Wow, and we can see there's a dark gray there, light gray I mean, and we see the foreground of the text has changed as well. But when you are using the subscribe button on YouTube, you will notice that the bell icon does not appear. It only appears when you have subscribed, but when it's in its normal state, so if I set that to false, we shouldn't be able to see that icon there. So I'll go back to the resource dictionary. So I'll set the visibility of this icon, our path file. I'll set it to collapse. So it'll be set to collapse, and I'll add in another trigger. Okay, now before I add in anything here, so what I'm going to do is this path, which is our icon here, should only appear when the subscribed value is set to true. So I'll put in a setter here. And this setter is going to target the visibility property, and our element has a name called bell here defined. So that's our element that we are targeting. It will set the visibility of the bell to visible. So only when the subscribe button is set to true are we going to be able to see the path here, which is our icon. So I'll have that set. Okay, so I'm going to add in another trigger. This one will be listening for the property that we created, which was the notify flag. So whenever this is set to true, it's going to change the icon to a dark one. So I'm going to add in a setter. If you notice, our icon was outlined, but when we change the state of this notify flag, that icon should become dark to indicate that the notifications are turned on. So I'll target the property type data, because we want to change our data, and I'll set the target to our bell element, and the value will be set to this geometry here. So this is our dark bell, same bell but just highlighted. So I'll get that geometry information and paste it there. So I'll go ahead and go back to the main window, and you can see the bell icon is no longer showing here. So I'll go ahead and just build. Alright, it was built. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the property of the notify flag here. I'll set it to true. Oh, but we still can't see the icon because our subscription is still false. So I'll set it back to false. Okay, and I'll set the subscribe property to true, and we can see our icon pops up here. And I'll also set the notify flag to true, and you can see the icon becomes darker. So we have the properties, and we've bound the properties to the visual appearance of our control. But now we need to implement interactions. So when I click this, we should be able to get it to change this property. And when I click this one, it should be able to change the notify flag property as well. So I'm going to do that in the code here in our class. I'm going to subscribe to an event called the loaded event. So I'll subscribe to this event. Now the reason I choose the loaded event is because sometimes when we create an instance of a control and we want to access some of its elements, especially those that are in the template, which is the control template, it's best to access them after the control has fully loaded, not before it has loaded. So only after the control has been loaded, that's when we can access those elements. So what I'm going to do is, using the template, so within our template here, I want to access an element. So I'll use the find name method here, and I'll put in the name. So we know that our border element here has got a name background, has got a name back here. So I'll add in back.